A letter dated January 1918, written by Monsignor Darcy to Amory, who is a second lieutenant in the 171st Infantry, port of embarkation, Camp Mills, Long Island. My dear boy, all you need tell me of yourself is that you still are. For the rest I merely search back an arrest of memory, a thermometer that records only fevers, and match you with what I was at your age. But men will chatter and you and I will still shout our futilities to each other across the stage until the last silly curtain falls plump upon our bobbing heads. But you are starting the spluttering magic lantern show of life with much the same array of slides as I had, so I need to write you if only to shriek the colossal stupidity of people. This is the end of one thing. For better or worse you will never again be quite the Amory Blaine that I knew, never again will we meet as we have met, because your generation is growing hard, much harder than mine ever grew, nourished as they were on the stuff of the 90s. Amory, lately I reread Aeschylus and there in the divine irony of the Agamemnon I find the only answer to this bitter age all the world tumbled about our ears, and the closest parallel ages back in that hopeless resignation. There are times when I think of the men out there as Roman legionaries, miles from their corrupt city, stemming back the hordes a little more menacing, after all, than the corrupt city, another blind blow at the race, furies that we passed with ovations years ago, over whose corpses we bleated triumphantly all through the Victorian era. And afterward an out-and-out materialistic world and the Catholic Church. I wonder where you'll fit in. Of one thing I'm sure, Celtic you'll live and Celtic you'll die, so if you don't use heaven as a continual referendum for your ideas you'll find earth a continual recall to your ambitions. Amory, I've discovered suddenly that I'm an old man. Like all old men, I've had dreams sometimes and I'm going to tell you of them. I've enjoyed imagining that you were my son, that perhaps when I was young I went into a state of coma and begot you, and when I came to, had no recollection of it. It's the paternal instinct, Amory, celibacy goes deeper than the flesh. Sometimes I think that the explanation of our deep resemblance is some common ancestor, and I find that the only blood that the Darcys and the O'Haras have in common is that of the O'Donohues. Stephen was his name, I think. When the lightning strikes one of us it strikes both. You had hardly arrived at the port of embarkation when I got my papers to start for Rome, and I am waiting every moment to be told where to take ship. Even before you get this letter I shall be on the ocean, then will come your turn. You went to war as a gentleman should, just as you went to school and college, because it was the thing to do. It's better to leave the blustering and tremulo heroism to the middle classes, they do it so much better. Do you remember that weekend last March when you brought Bern Holiday from Princeton to see me? What a magnificent boy he is. It gave me a frightful shock afterward when you wrote that he thought me splendid. How could he be so deceived? Splendid is the one thing that neither you nor I are. We are many other things, we're extraordinary, we're clever, we could be said, I suppose, to be brilliant. We can attract people, we can make atmosphere, we can almost lose our Celtic souls in Celtic subtleties, we can almost always have our own way, but splendid rather not. I am going to Rome with a wonderful dossier and letters of introduction that cover every capital in Europe, and there will be no small stir when I get there. How I wish you were with me. This sounds like a rather cynical paragraph, not at all the sort of thing that a middle-aged clergyman should write to a youth about to depart for the war. The only excuse is that the middle-aged clergyman is talking to himself. There are deep things in us and you know what they are as well as I do. We have great faith, though yours at present is uncrystallized. We have a terrible honesty that all our sophistry cannot destroy and, above all, a childlike simplicity that keeps us from ever being really malicious. I have written a keen for you which follows. I am sorry your cheeks are not up to the description I have written of them, but you will smoke and read all night. At any rate here it is. A lament for a foster son, and he going to the war against the king of foreign. Akon he is gone from me the son of my mind, and he in his golden youth like Angus o gay Angus of the bright birds, and his mind strong and subtle like the mind of Cuchulain on Muirtheme. O where a shrew his brow is as white as the milk of the cows of Maeve, and his cheeks like the cherries of the tree, and it bending down to Mary, and she feeding the Son of God. Aveeli of Roan his hair is like the golden collar of the kings at Tara, and his eyes like the four grey seas of Arran. And they swept with the mists of rain. Mavron go Gudio he to be in the joyful and red battle amongst the chieftains, and they doing great deeds of valor, his life to go from him, it as the cords of my own soul would be loosed. Of ich dealish my heart is in the heart of my son, and my life is in his life. Surely a man can be twice young in the life of his sons only. Jaduva Alanev, may the Son of God be above him and beneath him, before him and behind him. May the King of the elements cast a mist over the eyes of the King of Foreign. May the Queen of the Graces lead him by the hand the way he can go through the midst of his enemies and they not seeing him. May Patrick of the Gale and column of the churches and the 5,000 saints of Aaron be better than a shield to him, and he got into the fight. Akon. Amory, I feel, somehow, that this is all, one or both of us is not going to last out this war. I've been trying to tell you how much this reincarnation of myself in you has meant in the last few years. Curiously alike we are, curiously unlike. Goodbye, dear boy, and God be with you. Thayer Darcy. Embarking at night. Amory moved forward on the deck until he found a stool under an electric light. He searched in his pocket for notebook and pencil and then began to write, slowly, laboriously. We leave tonight. Silent, we filled the still, deserted street. A column of dim gray, and ghosts rose startled at the muffled beat along the moonless way. The shadowy shipyards echoed to the feet that turned from night and day. And so we linger on the windless decks, see on the spectre shore shades of 1,000 days, poor grey-ribbed wrecks. Oh, shall we then deplore those feudal years? See how the sea is white. The clouds have broken and the heavens burned to hollow highways, paved with gravelled light. The churning of the waves about the stern rises to one voluminous nocturne. We leave tonight. A letter from Amory, headed Brest, March 11, 1919, to Lieutenant T.P. D'Invilliers, Camp Gordon, Georgia. Dear Baudelaire, we meet in Manhattan on the 30th of this very mo. We then proceed to take a very sporty apartment, you and I and Alec, who is at me elbow as I write. I don't know what I'm going to do, but I have a vague dream of going into politics. Why is it that the pick of the young Englishmen from Oxford and Cambridge go into politics, and in the USA, we leave it to the muckers, raised in the ward, educated in the assembly and sent to Congress, fat-paunched bundles of corruption, devoid of both ideas and ideals, as the debaters used to say. Even 40 years ago we had good men in politics, but we are brought up to pile up a million and show what we are made of. Sometimes I wish I'd been an Englishman. American life is so damn dumb and stupid and healthy. Since poor Beatrice died, I'll probably have a little money, but very darn little. I can forgive Mother almost everything except the fact that in a sudden burst of religiosity toward the end, she left half of what remained to be spent in stained glass windows and seminary endowments. Mr. Barton, my lawyer, writes me that my thousands are mostly in street railways and that the said street RRS are losing money because of the 5-cent fares. Imagine a salary list that gives $350 a month to a man that can't read and write, yet I believe in it, even though I've seen what was once a sizable fortune melt away between speculation, extravagance, the Democratic administration, and the income tax. Modern, that's me all over, Mabel. At any rate, we'll have really knockout rooms. You can get a job on some fashion magazine, and Alec can go into the zinc company or whatever it is that his people own. He's looking over my shoulder and he says it's a brass company, but I don't think it matters much, do you? There's probably as much corruption in zinc-made money as brass-made money. As for the well-known Amory, he would write immortal literature if he were sure enough about anything to risk telling anyone else about it. There is no more dangerous gift to posterity than a few cleverly turned platitudes. Tom, why don't you become a Catholic? Of course, to be a good one you'd have to give up those violent intrigues you used to tell me about, but you'd write better poetry if you were linked up to tall golden candlesticks and long, even chants, and even if the American priests are rather bourgeois, as Beatrice used to say, still you need only go to the sporty churches, and I'll introduce you to Monsignor Darcy, who really is a wonder. Carrie's death was a blow, so was Jessie's to a certain extent. And I have a great curiosity to know what queer corner of the world has swallowed Byrne. Do you suppose he's in prison under some false name? I confess that the war, instead of making me orthodox, which is the correct reaction, has made me a passionate agnostic. The Catholic Church has had its wings clipped so often lately that its part was timidly negligible, and they haven't any good writers anymore. I'm sick of Chesterton. I've only discovered one soldier who passed through the much advertised spiritual crisis, like this fellow, Donald Hankey, and the one I knew was already studying for the ministry, so he was ripe for it. I honestly think that's all pretty much rot, though it seemed to give sentimental comfort to those at home, and may make fathers and mothers appreciate their children. This crisis-inspired religion is rather valueless and fleeting at best. I think 4 men have discovered Paris to one that discovered God. But us, you and me and Alec, we'll get a Jap butler and dress for dinner and have wine on the table and lead a contemplative, emotionless life until we decide to use machine guns with the property owners or throw bombs with the Bolshevik God. Tom, I hope something happens. I'm restless as the devil and have a horror of getting fat or falling in love and growing domestic. The place at Lake Geneva is now for rent, but when I land I'm going west to see Mr. Barton and get some details. Write me care of the Blackstone, Chicago. Sever, dear Boswell. Samuel Johnson.